Hi, I'm David Smith, and this is In a Word. In 1 John 4, verses 7 and 8, we have some of the most familiar statements in the Bible about love. Verse 7, John writes and says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love." You know, that's a common expression or phrase used in our society, love, and everybody talks about this is love or that is love. And there are a lot of false ideals about love in our society. Some people think love is just a word. Of course, the Bible tells us it's more than just a word, it's an action. Some people subjectively look at love and they say, well, you know, love is really just a feeling, and whatever I define as love is love, but that's not true. The Bible objectively shows us what love is. Some people even have in their mind, unfortunately so, that they're not capable of being loved. And they may say, I'm just not good enough to be loved. But of course, when you examine the fact that we are made in the image of God, it shows us that not only are we capable of loving, but we are at the same time capable of being loved. You know, if we hope to know anything about love, we have to learn what love is from the Bible. And so that's the beauty of Bible words, is that as we examine the words of the Bible, we learn more what God would have us to do to be more in His likeness. And so I want us today to look at that word love for just a second. Now, as we've been sort of removing false concepts, I want you to consider that there are other words in the original language for love, and none of these are what are enjoined upon us here. Sometimes you'll hear about phileo love. That's brotherly love. People talk about the affection that they have for a brother or sister in Christ. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about things that are erotic. There was such a thing as eros love, where it dealt more with sensual attraction. Some people even talk about storgeo, the love that had more to do with, for example, the love of a servant toward a master, the sort of familiarity that came in that kind of a relationship. But you are very well aware that the word love here is the word agape. And I want to show you some of the qualities that help us to define what love is in this passage, so that we know when we say love exactly what we mean. For example, notice in verse 19 it says, "We love Him because He first loved us." And then in verse 9, He explains exactly what that means. "In this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent His only begotten Son into the world that we might live through Him." I want you to consider in this demonstration of the love of God, God defines what agape love is. Notice that it is a love that is impartial. By that I mean that God did not pick and choose who He loves. He loves all men. He loves all men so much that He gave His only begotten Son for who? For all men. Now I know the benefits apply only to the church, but Jesus died for everybody. He died in their stead. Even those who in Romans 1 were called the enemies, or Romans 5 were called the enemies of God. This is an unconditional love. That is, in verse 19, we love Him because He first loved us. It is not contingent upon some kind of external circumstance. In other words, we love regardless of whether it will ever be reciprocated or not. Notice also in this passage that it is a sacrificial love. Again, I don't need to remind you that Jesus died in your stead. That's the sacrificial nature of agape love. From this we can learn that the love that God has toward man and that we are to have toward God and then toward each other is a love that is decided. It is a rational, logical love. It is an unconditional love, an impartial love, a sacrificial love that always does what is in the best interest of other men. Do you have this kind of love? Because that's the love that God has toward us. You know, there's so much wrapped up in the words of the Bible. But it's interesting to note that word agape, and then to read passages like 1 Corinthians 13, where we learn some of the practical qualities of that very love, agape love that always does what is in the best interest of others, just as God has done for us. I hope that you appreciate agape love, that you'll try to implement that in your life, and of course the beginning of that must be your submission to the will of the Lord. Agape. That's been our word for the day. I'm David Smith, and this is In a Word.